BC. This is Glenn, your low-end music freak, back with another video. That song was called John Hardy. This video is on the banjo, but not in necessarily a bluegrass context, although I did play a bluegrass song. I want to discuss the musicians that are taking the banjo out of bluegrass and into jazz and their own kind of new grass and own kind of acoustic music. David Grisman calls it dog music. New grass is kind of a title. It's all these kind of young guys that came out around in the 70s who were long-haired guys our age who fell in love with acoustic instruments and bluegrass music, but added a rock and roll flavor to it. You might be asking yourself how a guy who fell in love with the Beatles in 1964, and then the Rolling Stones, and then Cream and Hendrix and Led Zeppelin and Pink Floyd and whoever else you want to name, ended up playing a 5-string banjo. Well, I first heard the banjo in probably Beverly Hillbillies with Flatt and Scruggs. Didn't really care about it one way or the other. Then seeing Bonnie and Clyde at the show in 1967, Flatt and Scruggs' song "Foggy Mountain Breakdown" was prominent in the movie as the soundtrack. Deliverance in 1970. I mean, that was a cool song that actually made the charts, I think. But I kind of fell in love with it through things like Old and in the Way, Jerry Garcia, David Grisman, Peter Rowan, Vassar Clements. If you haven't heard this album, it's great. Jerry Garcia played a banjo back before he was in the Dead. And, they started adding kind of rock songs to this type of music. On this album, they do Wild Horses by the Stones. So I think people who were into rock music were starting to pay attention a little bit. I have some samples here I do want to play you as we go along. I'm just going to get them set up here to go. So the first guy I want to talk about is Bill Keith. Now, Bill Keith played with Bill Monroe in the early 60s, and then Bill took the Scruggs-style three-finger picking that we're all used to when we hear bluegrass music, and he decided to make it a little more melodic, and he did a thing it's actually called melodic banjo. It's where you pick a lot of melody notes. Really interesting. Bill's album, This Something Old, Something Newgrass, Something Borrowed, Something Bluegrass, has a lot of bluegrass stuff on it, but he also does No Expectations by the Stones. I'll give you a sample of that.
Take me to the station and you put me on a train, for I've got no expectation to ever pass through here again.
So you can kind of hear where that's headed, even though it still sounds very countryish. You can see the ideas forming in people's heads that they're trying to combine rock music with traditional music. From there was a gentleman by the name of Tony Trishka, who I didn't bring any of his CDs or records with me here, but he really started to branch out and do some pretty experimental stuff. And one of his students was a young phenom from New York City by the name of Fela Fleck, who is probably the greatest banjo player on earth right now. Bela was a young man, fell in love with the banjo through the Beverly Hillbillies, and Tony took him through all the bluegrass stuff, and he picked that up so fast that he started to branch out himself and do some crazy stuff. He ended up in Boston playing with a bluegrass band called Tasty Licks, then moved on to a band called Spectrum, which did play a few rock type tunes. The one I remember is Red Rubber Ball. They did that, the Paul Simon song. Then Bela put out his own album called Crossing the Tracks, Now, this album had a bit of bluegrass stuff on it, but it was really intricate stuff, not the typical three chord stuff that you would typically hear. Um, Here is Bela doing Chick Corea's Spain on this album. Now, this is what got me into jazz. I never even thought of listening to jazz till I heard this song. It blew me away. Jerry Douglas on the dobro, Fela Fleck on the banjo, Chick Corea's Spain. Sam Bush on the mandolin. Boy, did that song ever open my ears. It changed my whole way of thinking about music. Unbelievable how much of an impression that had on me. So Bela, he ended up kept putting out solo album after solo album, some great stuff. That album's called Crossing the Tracks, but the album I showed you, Daybreak, is like a compilation of that album and a couple others. So it's got about 15 songs, 20 songs on it from two or three different albums. Crossing the Tracks, Natural Bridge, Double Time, Deviation, and Inroads. Any of those albums, if you want to hear some different style of playing, those albums are all highly recommended. So Bela kept going, and in the late 80s, he put together a band called Fela Fleck and the Flecktones. And his collaborator in this is the amazing bass player Victor Wooten. If you've never heard Victor Wooten, just Google him on YouTube and watch some of his playing. He's a monster bass player. They put together the most exciting band that I heard. I was so excited by these guys. Traveled all over to see them. I was like a deadhead, I guess a Fleck head. My wife and I drove to South Carolina. We saw them in Boston. Went to Cleveland at Oberlin College to see them. Buffalo a couple times. Toronto too many times to even mention. Incredible live band. I'm sure once this COVID nonsense is over, they'll be back touring. But here is a couple of tunes this is from their first album, a really cool song called Sinister Minister. They kind of joined bluegrass music, jazz, and funk together in this band. So here's Sinister Minister. Okay, that was Sinister Minister. Um, Here's a couple other songs. They not only did kind of funky stuff, they did a lot of beautiful melodies too. The banjo is definitely an instrument that's very versatile in that regard that people don't think about. Here's a song called Big Country. Okay, one more off this same album called Sunset Road. This is one of my favorite instrumentals of all time on any instrument. Just a beautiful song. So Bill just didn't stick with the Flecktones. He did all kinds of side projects. Um, he's played with a lot of great jazz people. He plays a lot with Chick Corea. Um, he did some with the Marcus Roberts Trio, which is a really nice jazz album. Here's a live show he did with Chick Corea and Fela Fleck. It's called Two. Um, Great performance. There's also a studio album they did together. And then Bela did his own classical music album, just solo banjo. Incredible. So I'm going to give you a little bit of taste of that if you're a classical music fan. This is Bach Cello Suite Number 1. Okay, and one more off of that album. It's called Scarlatti Sonata in D minor. The incredible Fela Fleck, one of the greatest musicians on the planet. Bela can play any instrument he wants. He just chose to do it through a banjo. So now there's a couple other banjo players that have really pushed the limits. Alison Brown is another one. Alison's amazing. This is a song she did called G-Bop, which is a jazz bop song. It's very cool. So great jazz. If you're interested in acoustic instrumental music, I mean, you can't go wrong with these albums and these artists. The last musician I want to mention, banjo player, is a fellow from Czechoslovakia. His name is Jens Kruger. Him and his brother Yui have the Kruger brothers, where they do a lot of traditional stuff and that. But Jens is just an incredible banjo player. He has such a beautiful touch on the banjo. One thing I don't know, if you don't play a banjo, you might not realize is there's no sustain. Like on a guitar, if you listen to the great B.B. King, he plays one note and that'll cover 1,000 notes. He can get so much emotion out of one note. With a banjo, you play the note and it's gone in a second. So that's why you get so many notes together, because it's hard. But anyway, Jens Kruger, he has an amazing touch, and he's found a way to get a little bit of sustain and out of his banjo. I just wanted to play a song called High Up in the Sky. I think this is a beautiful instrumental. The amazing Jens Kruger. I'm going to leave you with a song that was popular. I think it's written by Aaron Copland, Hoedown, made popular by Emerson, Lake and Palmer. This is Fela Fleck and the Flecktones, Hoedown. That is Hoedown by Fela Fleck and the Flecktones. Jeff Coffin playing the saxophone there. He was a member of the band for quite a few years and now is a member of the Dave Matthews Band. So if you've seen Dave Matthews live in the last probably 5 years or more, you've seen Jeff Coffin. Thanks so much for watching. I hope people who love the banjo enjoyed it, and I hope the people who don't love the banjo learn something and maybe learn to appreciate it a bit more. Thanks for watching. I really appreciate all the support on my channel. Love you guys. Take care. Bye.